Thanks everyone for coming. I think we'll get started now.
So, just a quick disclaimer that this is all our personal opinions. We are not speaking on behalf of our employer or the Kubernetes project or anything like that. But most of our experiences are derived from the Kubernetes project itself, so you're going to find a lot of references to it. I'm a Kubernetes, oh, I forgot to do the intro. So I'm a Kubernetes maintainer. Kiran's also.
Yep. I've worked on a bunch of Kubernetes projects and I'm maintainer of a couple of SIG projects. But Nikita forced me to become a manager in
I
my
did not
current
force
role.
him to become a manager. He's full of.
Yeah. So I'm right now an engineering manager at VMware, helping like the open source engineers continue to contribute to open source projects.
And he's one of the best managers I've worked with, and probably the only one of the few managers who really understands open source.
Nikita for saying that.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about open source, why we are all here and all that. So every product that we build uses open source. So it's a no-brainer that open source is the way to go forward. Um, can keep going here, I think. She's holding the controls. So why does it matter? So what's open source is pretty simple. And why do open source matters? Every app or like, if we have to stay competitive and lead the industry towards a certain direction, doing it together is the only way to do that. Like Tim says, like, one of our principal engineer, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, go together, right? So now this all looks like a little bit of a standard.
Are you trying to like one of the standard open sourcey talks with like boring templates and everything? Kiran?
Yeah, who doesn't contribute to open source projects here? Great.
Okay,
And
and how many of you folks who actually contribute to open source projects do it as part of your day job? Okay, that is quite a few folks.
cool. Um, so this is not yet another open source talk where we just try to like, tell why and what of open source. What we really want to do is share our journey as engineers working on the open source projects, right? How many can relate to this slide? Right, so this was like right out of like the keynote today, right? There are a lot of intent to contribute or like, fund the open source engineers, but when it comes down to it, we still are like struggling to do this right, right?
Yeah, and we hope it gets better. The keynote was optimistic, like it keeps us optimistic that there are companies who are willing to invest in upstream. So we hope that it becomes a reality. Sure.
Yep, very optimistic.
And just wanted to give a quick shout out and thank you to all the community members. We've been friends with so many of them, even Christoph here. Uh, and like we've been speaking to so many folks who work on open source as part of their day jobs, who don't work on open source as part of their day jobs, and the struggles that they face, the wins that they've had. And we've tried to compile them into sort of patterns, and we've tried to present them in the slide.
Yeah, and also thanks to all those people that work behind the scenes in an enterprise, taking the projects that we build and convert into a product. So it's not really about like a project or a product. Both have to go together, right? So what we want to establish or like, share with you are the patterns where we can co-work and help each other out, right? So this is like the standard yin and yang kind of a thing. So we can't do this alone. We need the support of the product teams, and product teams can't do it alone. They need the support of the project teams. And the whole thing, I just wanted to plug in like the Indian context to this. Like the yin and yang is like a popular one, but we also see that manifested in almost like every other culture. This is one of those, the dancing picture here is Shiva and Shakti, or Ardhanarishwar as it is called. It's a fine balance between power and how do you actually control it, right? Open source gives you the power, and product teams control the business out of it, right? Cool. So as open source projects, right? Like I think we all understand the projects that we maintain, and we are really good at it. We We are the managers and the product managers, everything about that open source project. But that project alone is not something that a customer needs, right? They have to put together a lot of things. So the product companies that we are all employed in have this need to assemble all of them together and make a solution out of it. And it's not an easy problem, right? As many project contributors we have, we also need product developers for that one, right? And this list is just growing. A part of the growth in the number of projects that we are seeing is also a problem that we created. And we'll come to how we are creating that problem, right? And how we could probably potentially address that.
So from the 2021 CNCF annual report, and I think this is almost also public knowledge, we're seeing that Kubernetes has crossed the chasm. A lot of companies are adopting it, they're productizing it, so you've got a lot of users building platforms, services, and products on top of Kubernetes, which also means that Kubernetes experts who were originally contributing to the Kubernetes project, they are required by their companies, their employers, to work on the products, because that is where the customers are interacting directly. Now, what this also means is that the project level is losing contributors, and if you are a new contributor, heck, even if you are an existing contributor and you create a pull request and you are looking for reviews, you just don't get that right now. Like, it has happened with me, it has happened with a lot of Kubernetes contributors who are sitting here. You create a pull request, maybe you'll get a few review comments, and the reviewers disappear for a few days, and they'll come back again whenever they have time. Now, this is okay, but this slows down the project in terms of how the PRs are merged, the commits are merged, which also means that this is a problem to companies and businesses. This is just not a hypothetical scenario. It is a problem to you as well if you ship a Kubernetes product. If you have a feature that you want to get inside Kubernetes, it's going to take longer and longer as this problem gets worse and worse. So it's going to affect your release timelines, and it means Kubernetes is at risk, and your businesses are also at risk.
Yeah, just to add one more thing about the less visible part of it, right? I think it's used in so many other applications than it was originally intended to. So now making any change to Kubernetes core requires a lot more thought and discussions.
The Kubernetes 2021 annual report from the steering committee also says that a lot of contributors are not working on upstream Kubernetes 100% of their time anymore, which was true a few years ago. Now, it's okay if contributors are working, say, 80% of the time, 50, 60, whatever percentage of their time, but it's starting to affect, like I said, reviewers. Another pattern that we've also seen is that a lot of senior engineers, they've been asked to work on the products and so on, which means we're also losing senior engineers from the Kubernetes project. We've got a lot of new contributors showing up. We've got a lot of students showing up, which is great. I don't want to say that's not good. But we also need senior engineers to move the project forward, and that's a huge problem that we're facing. And we'll talk a lot more about it as we go forward.
Yep. So with senior engineers going out of the picture, right? There could be so many reasons. Maybe they have gotten a career growth and they have taken on a bigger role, or they just got burnt out, which is also a real case that happens with most of the senior engineers that work on these projects day in and day out beyond their day job, right? So it results in an interesting pattern. Now, companies already start using these projects. Now, those companies want to enhance that with some new features that the new customers are asking. When those requests are coming back to the project maintainers are not able to respond to those requests, which is actually seen happening. Some of these requests take longer to go and get introduced into the project. This means product companies can't wait for that long for a open source project to show the roadmap or when that's going to be done. So they end up building parallel projects, or they could be actually maintaining force, which becomes a dangerous situation where you'll be pulling more and more engineers away from open source, and also increasing the complexity in terms of number of projects that are coming back to the CNCF or that we have to deal with for integrations.
And one of the biggest challenges that I've personally faced, that we've all personally faced, is just convincing executives and leadership to invest in upstream, to actually hire upstream engineers. So when we first proposed it to our leadership, we went in with a proposal which said, okay, for SIG node, for whatever SIG, right? Like, here's what you need to do. Here are the problems that the SIG is facing. Here are the features that we need in our product and blah, 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 blah. And all I got was blank faces. Like one thing we've understood is that executives won't understand your SIG or the minute problems that you're facing. What you need to talk about is numbers. What they understand best is numbers. You need to talk about customers, the customer impact that they've been creating. It actually reminds me of an analogy that Jace had once shared, who's also a Kubernetes project contributor and maintainer. Like, think of it as a city park that needs to be clean. And the park is too large for any one company to clean it up. So if you, as a company, know that you're going to have a picnic in one part of the park, then you go clean that area first versus all the other areas. That is the logical thing to do. And that also makes you good citizens, and it also serves the needs of your company. And open source projects are no different. So if you, as a company, are looking to invest in open source, you need to build a strategy which impacts your customers and also does good to the community as well. The other thing that we found it hard to convince was, like I talked about senior engineers. We need senior engineers who can invest certain percentage of their time, even if not 100%, I know that's hard, in upstream. It's still a hard problem for us to solve. It's not like we've solved it completely. But what has helped in the past is we talk about, okay, these are the customer issues that can get resolved if we have certain senior, like for testing, okay, like we have this certain engineer who works on testing, employed in upstream and so on. And also talk about how this would expedite the resolution process.
Yep. Metrics is a hard problem. I think like there are like some data that's available, look at that.
Yeah. Another huge, huge problem that we've seen is, say we solve the staffing problem, the hiring problem. So companies will hire engineers to work on open source. They might hire engineers who are already working in upstream, and they might even give them time to develop upstream expertise, but then they get tasked to solve customer issues. And now, again, this is not a bad thing. It starts getting a little unwieldy when it's one customer issue, then another, and then another, and back-to-back customer issues, and the engineer just doesn't have time to work on upstream anymore. This has happened so many times that, like, I can't count it, but I'm sure you have a lot of experiences on this as well.
I'm a manager, and I get pulled into these discussions. So it takes a long time for any feature to get like actually into the product or like into the release of the open source. So they'll be looked at like, this process is free. They're not working on anything urgent, but this customer issue is urgent. Let's pull them and make them work on this, right? Yeah.
So here's some data points to kind of back what we are all talking about. This graph shows the average monthly commits in the Kubernetes/Kubernetes, so the main Kubernetes repo. So we saw a 32% decline in 2020. It was likely fueled by the pandemic, but there were a lot of other reasons, burnout, the world's been going through a crazy time as well. But then what's interesting is that this is a consistent trend. So we've had approximately 45% decrease in 2021 and an almost 41% decrease in 2022 now. So like the number of commits has been, it's not a small number. It's like when you look at the graph, it's going down like crazy. And what happens in the future is the big question. Now again, why might this be happening? So this graph from DevStats shows company contributions, and this has been decreasing over time. We've not included any company names because the point is not to like name or shame anyone, but it clearly shows, and companies have been contributing less, the commits have been going down as well.
The contributions here are not just about code, and there are like a lot of other things, right? So overall, like the commits to the projects have definitely been declining.
Yeah, and we have almost 70,000 or contributors in the Kubernetes project with 10,000 contributors getting added every single year. 10,000 is not a small number. We are not increasing our reviewers or approvers. We call approvers as folks who can actually sign off on changes to any pull requests. So we're not adding that number. So the ratio has been getting unbalanced as we move on. So 10,000 new contributors adding every year, the number of reviewers actually declining. So the project is like, it's going to be hard to get us to working sustainably. The other thing, I want to quote Madhav here, that he pointed out was, so there's this thing called chop wood and carry water, if you aren't familiar with it. It's basically the unglamorous work that you do. It could be something as triaging issues or answering questions on Slack or mentoring a new contributor and so on. Now, as the project's been growing, and this happens not just to the Kubernetes project, any open source project, as the project grows, the maintainers need to do a lot more chop wood and carry water work. And this takes a significant percentage of their time, which also means that if they work on open source as part of their day job, and they have performance reviews and they want to apply for promotion or whatever, they need to justify this chop wood and carry water work. And this is the hardest thing to measure ever. Like, the metrics on this, like, it's very hard to get any metrics on this, and DevStats just like counts the GitHub events. So how do you really measure mentoring or you're answering questions on Slack? Like, how do you measure all of that? That's been really hard. The other thing that takes up not just my time or folks working in my employer, but like everywhere, we've seen this everywhere, is justifying it, right? And this takes up a lot of our time. So it leaves us lesser and lesser time to actually write code and work on things that we want to work on.
Yep. So I think chop wood, carry water, people that come to this conference, they get called out in like the keynotes, they get awarded in like the contributor summits. But then who are the audience that are actually seeing this, right? So we do need to carry this information and have the conversations at a senior leadership level, where these are important. If you are not going to credit these people that are doing this CW work, then the investments are going to be pulled out, right? So we have to have like some way in which we can quantify that the ratio that we have between like the number of contributors that are coming in to like the number of maintainers of that project, that's pretty bad. One way to look at this is, imagine like if you're running a product, enterprises have like really good metrics around like, how many people in a team should be like junior versus senior. Why is it different for an open source, right? It should be something similar, right? And the other problem also like with respect to like the getting new contributors has been senior engineers are already like burnt out. So we end up like, when new contributors come, they don't know how to navigate this entire thing and get to contributors or like a maintainer status, and then they just run away, right? Or like they're just disappearing.
Yeah. But I also want to talk about some positive aspects here. So if you look at the number of monthly unique PR authors, it's slightly decreased maybe, but it's almost remained the same. So people are creating issues, they're creating PRs and so on. If you look at the average number of monthly PRs opened, it's again, so that one was about issues, this is about PRs, so it's almost remained the same. But the number of reviews, they have been going down like anything. It's again almost like a linear graph. So that's the point that we were trying to make. Like, there is interest in the project, but the number of reviewers and reviews have been going down. So how do we bring this graph back up, right? Yeah.
I think the solution is probably like very easy. It's right in front of us. We need like more senior engineers working and also training more new members to become like the maintainers. But how do we do this? That's probably where this is. And I think like some of these graphs have helped to some extent, but we do need to build like a lot more data around what the senior engineers in the community are doing to encourage more investments into that field. So this is an interesting graph.
Yeah, this one is a little interesting. So this graph shows the number of review comments. One thing we've noticed is the number of review comments have been increasing. Anecdotally, what we are like correlating it is, one thing is that the project is becoming complex. So the newer features that you add, you need to like the reviews are pretty complex. The second thing we've also noticed is that new contributors try to jump in and help out with reviews as well, which leads to quite a bit of review comments too.
Yep. Yeah, I think like the talk that we attended earlier about node shutdown, it took like literally 4 to 5 years to get to where we are, right?
Yeah. The best way to solve all of this is mentorship. But like you said, almost all senior engineers are burnt out. And if they're not employed to work on open source, they just don't have time to mentor. And a project as large as Kubernetes, a lot of context is undocumented, it's just lost. So like I was saying, like I've had instances where you create a PR, you need someone who's the original author of some part of the code base to actually show up and approve that PR, otherwise that PR is just not getting merged. So like unless we have mentorship, we always need to ping the original authors and we're just not moving the project forward. So mentorship is definitely like the right answer, and hiring senior more engineers and so on.
Yeah, I think like a related problem to this is like I've spoken to some people where their companies are allowing the engineers to work on open source, at least like 20% or 40% of the time, but they don't know how to do that. So it comes back to like goes back to like the complexity of the project. It's pretty important to like have some programs in each of these open source projects to get new people to a maintainer level,
Yep.
right? Yeah. So this is like just a quick recap, but we could probably skip. I think everybody understands this, right? So we'll get on to our journey on how.
Yes,
we did
so
this,
how
right?
did we create the team?
Yep. So one quick way to find out like if we are doing the right thing or not is like a quick poll on people who are contributing to the open source. Are they doing it for their company or helping someone else, right? If the answer comes as like I'm helping someone else, we have to drill down on that, right? That's not a very sustainable model. There could be like a handful of people that can continue in that mode for a very long time. This model becomes sustainable when we have more maintainers and contributors that are doing this for their company or themselves, right? Yeah, this one is like something that we all can all relate to. We have to make sure like we put the mask on the project or the product before we help the other. So what do you think, Nikhita? Which one is the project in this case, mother or the child?
I think that would be the mother. Like open source, the project is like the foundation layer, and if that goes already, like what happens to the product? Like the foundation needs to be strong.
Yeah, and I don't think it's like a role that's like fixed. Sometimes it's like the product that becomes like the thing that needs more care, or like the project that needs more care. So we have to identify which one needs the more attention and fix
It's
it
a
right now.
balance.
Yeah, it's a balance. Cool.
So one other thing you can see from here is that we need to always align with business, right? Like business alignment is the biggest thing here. Like companies aren't going to fund upstream engineers or let us work on projects in upstream unless it's aligned to something that is bringing us revenue.
Yep.
So the way we see it is it's a very basic success metric. So the project that you're contributing to must be thriving, and the products that you're building should enable your customers.
Yep. And one thing to call out is like, I think like most of the organizations know the importance. There's actually like a central body that helps with all the open source strategy and like identifying the projects. But what we are talking about here is each product needs to have somebody in that BU or like the product team or the portfolio team that's constantly advocating for the need for sustained investment in the project. And this is not something that we can do as an engineers day in and day out. So we need like somebody at a senior level that's constantly talking to the leadership to make the case for this growth. So we've been like lucky, I would say, not like really bad than other organizations where we have like a VP, a director, and like a product manager that understands the problem. It's important to have that kind of people in this case. The other thing that I just wanted to bring out here is when these things are not there, the burden comes down to like the maintainers and what should the maintainers be doing, right? Uh, I've had this situation, this I'm just quoting in my own team, right? Like there was Arnav who was trying to help out with the recent patch release, and there were like something that came up, I had to pull him out. But if I keep doing this again and again, then that's not a sustainable model, right? So there has to be a solid reason for pulling somebody out of a commitment in the open source. In this case, we had to pull him out because there was a CVE related stuff that was going on to figure out like, if we should be doing something more into the patch. So it resulted in a good thing, but such instances have to be like minimized as we go forward, right?
I like that you call yourself out here.
I
Kiran.
don't do a good job all the time, so
No,
still learning.
no,
but,
this is doing a good job.
Yep. So this, when we don't have that senior leadership, and in fact, like that was a real case with us, right? Like it was like the maintainers of the project. We're just taking the example of Kubernetes here, but this has happened within our organizations with almost all the other projects. So the senior engineers or like the people on the project who are the maintainers, right? They have to do this extra stuff, like act as an engineering manager, act as a product manager, or be a mentor for the new people, right? And also constantly work on giving small tangible wins so that the team is motivated. It's very easy to get into this thing that, okay, things are not working good, I'm going to go out of open source project. That's not going to solve anybody's problem, right? So we've been lucky to have
Work
DIMS
them.
on the Kubernetes project who helped us navigate this thing.
Yeah, and not even, so Dims no longer works at VMware, but even when he was at VMware, he was such a strong voice for upstream contributions and pushing for it and like fighting with executives sometimes, fighting the good fight of getting like the team that I work on, it wouldn't have existed if DIMS weren't here.
Yep.
And it's not just within the company, by the way, it's also within the community. As a former steering committee member, like working with the CNCF, working with the Linux Foundation, working with other companies, trying to get more contributors for sure.
Yep. We need more people like this. I think we are like lucky to have like a lot of people like this already in the community, but this has to go on. And to this effect, we'll not dwell into this topic a lot, but the next talk that Paris and team are giving is exactly on this, right? In the same room. So we should.
Yeah, so this is more about what a company should or can do, and Paris's talk is going to be more about what you can do in that company. So please, like, make sure to attend that one as well.
Right. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we have had with open source project was like creating silos around it. So the pattern that we have observed is we are pretty good as an open source community serving our users. There's pretty much like a great correlation between like everything that happens in a project, open source project, and if you consider users as a customers, we have figured that out. We do great job, great products are coming out. But the moment it goes into customers, right, we kind of like have like a different team called a product team. So we don't like work together really well. It's context switching. It's not always like going to be easy to do this, right? And we are not suggesting that like people who are contributing to the project should be contributing to product teams. But there has to be some kind of a synergy here, right? So listening to the pain that our downstream, for lack of better word, people are like facing and trying to see if we can address anything in the upstream will be like a great way to create this balance, right? So just like how users get into a customer's persona and like, users are like the early adopters, but when customers, with their like a lot of people like Kubernetes has crossed the chasm kind of thing, these customers have a totally different mindset about how to use the project. And the burden of like enabling them falls on the product teams. We shouldn't let product teams say like, you're like someone else. You deal with the projects and we are like only going to talk about like the community, right? We have to have those conversations. We have to have channels where we engage with each other. Again, just to be clear, we're not talking about the same person working on two things. It's about like having the conversations with each other.
So here's what our team charter looks like. I'm gonna like.
And when
I
she
think we have a.
says our team, it's the upstream team, right? And just to be clear.
Yeah, sorry, I should have been pretty clear about that. We mainly care about three things. I'm going to go a little quicker here because we've got just 5 minutes left. So one is actually writing the code. So that's the implementation part. The second part is we call enablement. So that is actually enabling other internal teams at VMware. So we act as the feedback loop between the community and the product teams. And finally, engagement. So it's growing both VMware folks and community members, mentoring them, and trying to grow the project itself.
So I think we all want to grow, both as a project, as a product, but also as individuals, right? And it's not always going to be a straight path. There are times, it's a sine wave. That's what we have realized working on this. And they both have to go together. If one of them falls apart, it pulls down the other one. That's really important for us to understand. So this is from the Detroit streets. Things aren't as bad. Everything is going to be all right. It's a little blurry. You can't see through the trees, but we're getting better, right?
Yeah, and things that have worked well for us is one is customer trust. So if any upstream, like Kubernetes or any other open source project escalation comes in, customers would trust us to solve that issue because we have expertise in that project. And also, even if, just because we are participating in the Kubernetes project, we build friends, we build a network. So we build karma in the project. For example, I don't work on security, but I know Pushkar who does, who's also a good friend. So I'm just going to go bug him until I get my issue resolved. So that's how you build your network, and you can develop customer trust as well.
Yeah. I think I've also been in some customer calls where some of the times it becomes easy to say, oh, that feature that you need, oh yeah, my team already is working on it. This is where you can see how that is going on, right? So that adds a lot of value in terms of trust.
Yeah, so one, again, work-life balance for sure. I want to spend time with my family and friends. I don't want to do pull request reviews on my personal time. So that's kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah. So by the way, this slide had 100% full-time OSS developers.
Yeah.
We tried to change it because that's the reality. We can never be 100% full-time open source engineers. It will be almost full-time.
Yeah.
That's probably what's the reality at this point that's possible.
Right. And the biggest thing so all of this, it doesn't really matter, to be honest, at the end of the day. What really matters is how we feel when we are contributing. And the biggest thing that's worked out for me, and you can see in all of these quotes from Nabarun, who's also a steering committee member, is the global impact that you create. The impact that you create both internally, externally, and how you see, you mentor other folks and how you see them grow from just a mere contributor to a member to a reviewer and so on. So that's the thing that keeps us going.
Yeah. And from a manager perspective, right, it's, when you work in an enterprise product, you have some customer success and all those metrics that you can pull in. But it's also important to get your managers to attend events like this, especially the contributor summit, or ask them to see the Twitter. There's so much that your team is doing that's out there. The appreciation is all out there. I think somebody has to act that, put that bridge on bringing that back into the company. I think CNCF or Kubernetes community does a great job of if you're already contributing, you reach out to them and tell that we want to use this for promotion of an individual or things like that, and that works, right?
You actually bring up a good point. This is wasn't in the slides, but I want to bring your manager to these events. I was just speaking to someone this morning, and they were telling how their manager mostly attends customer meetings and so on because that's really tied to their revenue, and they're not active in the contributor summits or the open source maintainer sessions. But bring your manager here so they can actually see the impact that you're creating and hear the shout outs and everything that we're building.
Super. I think we'll just flip through because we only have 1 minute. So we just wanted to leave you with call it commandments or the principles that we have to work together as a product and a project. So if the product's goal should be around minimizing the internal patches, which basically means we have to support that by making the upstream more extensible. The product's goal should be not to replicate and create a fork, but rather build the secure pipeline and the long-term support around the product. The upstream,
And yeah, on the upstream side, like build forward-looking features, do the chop wood and carry water work. Your Kubernetes, you're not going to get a Kubernetes release without all the chop wood and carry water efforts from the Kubernetes contributors and maintainers.
Yeah, I want to just touch on the last one though. I think companies understand like sending individuals to customer events or like company events, that's pretty much given, like, they're growing. But it's also very important to send the people that are working in the project to the community events. That's where you build the karma and like, you
Yeah,
progress.
I know funding is hard, but this also should be a priority because it is important that maintainers attend events like these, collaborate with each other, and network with each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy that
We all are
many of
here.
the VMware folks are here, both managers and individuals, right?
Yeah.
Cool. That was the last one that we had.
Thank you.